People will talk. A surprising episode because we don't have anybody else here to interview who's like a Japanese English poet or some guy who's been there and done that, all that kind of stuff, just you and
We
me.
love them all.
Obviously, yeah, it's great. I say it was strange because we got so used to it, but
Yeah, we
obviously
did.
now we need to be doing just like talking to you, which is fine.
Oh, thanks, likewise.
So this is back to banter central and also lots of cultural stuff. Not inside and outside Madrid. I mean, actually, no. Yeah, it is inside and outside Madrid because I was forgetting about the documentaries. I was just focusing on the
Very
exhibitions and things like that. And a little birdie told me we can't really say too much about this, which always prefaces something about a book. But you're getting published again.
Am I?
You are.
Is that little bit you
Yeah.
yourself?
So congratulations, the cover's been made. Looks lovely. Are you happy with the cover?
I'm very happy.
Great stuff. So, well, on the cutesy, but now, people are like, oh, when's that coming out? So this kind of marketing machine's kind of cranking up a little bit. And we'll pull into full force when the book is actually published. But apart from, obscure sideswipes at the start of the podcast, who are they talking about, these official people? Apart from slagging off you, because
You know who you
yeah,
are.
yeah, and we know where you are. And also, what else can I say? Because normally we're quite diplomatic, but Jesus, I think we just went off in a wild one now with this one. But apart from not doing interviews, we're and apart from mentioning what we're going to talk about, which is what we should do next. We have been to a place called Pablo VI.
Pablo VI. Fundación, Paul VI was a pope, no?
He was, yeah. Growing up in my generation, John Paul II was the man. So
that is true.
So we went to a Catholic university and we went to see an exhibition. So you obviously found a lot of nice exhibitions for us to go to see. We've only been to one of them so far, so more podcast material to come out based on the ones that we do see. But it was called The Lives of Others, not to be confused with that German movie about the Stasi.
Yeah.
Which is quite good if you haven't seen it. So the background is people primarily in Nairobi, Pakistan, and Bolivia. A few other countries pop up as well, but primarily these are the countries, and it's of people, their photographs in these countries or other lives. And as always, could you maybe give us some insight to why this exhibition is there? What's the background? What's the skinny?
I think this is something they've just started doing. In fact, I wasn't sure whether it was like a gallery or something, but it's not. It's just part of the university. It's just a university building. And there were lectures there and everything when we arrived. But it seems to be a new thing that they're just showcasing some work by some people. In this case, I believe linked to, Christianity basically somehow, because that's what the foundation is for. It's a Catholic foundation, and also a lot of the people that were pictured were Christian minorities. Obviously, for example, not in Bolivia, but in Pakistan, for example, I'm pretty sure there were a couple of pictures of Syria as well, Christians in Syria.
Very good. But not all the photographs were of Christians. There were also Quran schools and things like, and a picture of a priest in a burnt out church.
Yeah, Coptic priest.
Coptic priest, yeah.
Christian,
yeah. Exactly. And you actually, going back to the book you're publishing.
That we cannot talk about.
Because of you, I know, because people always say about the Pope or whatever, there's only one pope, but there's actually two popes.
Aha, yeah, I
Is
had
he
this
Coptic
corrected
as well?
so many times, didn't I? Yeah, of course, it's like a, well, this, it's not exactly Coptic, but well, yeah, it's the Orthodox Church, basically.
The
Yeah,
Orthodox Church.
yeah, has a pope. And of course there's the Catholic Pope as well. So yeah, when you say like the Pope is okay if you're kind of like in a Catholic sphere, but it sort of like seems like you're not being precise enough if you are writing for global audiences, like was the aim of the book.
Exactly, which is obviously to appeal to as many people as possible.
That's it.
I think they call it the lowest common denominator. Um, but there was some nice photographs there, I have to say.
Which ones do you like?
Well, there's one called, this is where the title probably of the podcast is coming from, Arizona Fish and
Probably
Chicken.
coming from no line up. We just made it up.
Yeah, because I don't know what the story is. It's just like a place in Nairobi, and there's two floors in this place. And again, we should say we have been to places before where it's an art gallery or an exhibition in a hostel or some kind of office or even a hospital. And this time it's in this place where lectures are happening, and there's people milling around and going to class and going to the bathroom, so not to be in the lecture. So it's like not that many photographs there, but all are nice. But that particular section on the second floor around that was pretty interesting because you had like street markets. You had also this picture in particular, which is of a bus driving in front of this place called Arizona Fish and Chicken. And again, your imagination runs wild because they do provide information in most of the photographs in a very elegant way, which is just like, for example, short texts and things like that, and that kind of just beautifully puts you into the story a little bit. But what I think when I see this picture, it's like KFC or like Kentucky Fried Chicken or Popeyes in Spain, which is like Louisiana fried chicken. I think there's like also another branch of that, another part of America as well. From the south. In Spain and probably in America as well. So there is this thing of naming a fried chicken place after a place in America, but this doesn't really have the same color scheme you'd think it would have. It's mixing fish and chicken, which could be.
I was gonna say, I think that's the main takeaway.
Well, maybe that's a Nairobi thing,
That was my point.
And I didn't hear it, but I'm sure it's a good one. And
actually, it wasn't the main takeaway.
That's good. And then it's just kind of this random place like Alabama, which I don't think has any recognition or fame for the food debut. Maybe it does, but
Arizona.
not yeah. So I think it's just like this kind of, it's like somebody who in Ireland would set up, maybe they're not even Chinese, but they set up a Chinese restaurant, Wicklow Chicken, or they set up like what's Chinese, and I'll just come up with a name for my Chinese restaurant, and it's exactly like that, So it's just like this mishmash pastiche of half-heard things through a life and everything like that. So
we're saying all this, and there could be a place called Arizona in Nairobi that we don't know of.
Oh well, that's true. So, but it's unlikely though, because I mean, you do have places in America named after places in England, like York is gave New York and all that stuff. So I don't think it's as common as in Africa.
No, it's just
and then the Bolivian ones. Well, let's focus on Africa first. So there's like some great ones of different parts of Africa where people are just kind of hanging out, and all of them kind of show either social scenes or dynamic things, people moving or people together. And they're just photographed really, really well, and that's half the battle. If it's kind of done in an interesting way aesthetically, then the story's kind of half told, and then it's just a lot of dynamic things. And usually it's either it could be a group of people, and there's a lot of people at the front, and it kind of stretches out to the back, so there's a lot of depth to the photographs as well. So simple but elegant, I would say. There's even one street scene in Pakistan that they highlight of just people walking on the street. Again, just a lot of depth there and lots of people looking different ways, different shapes, all that kind of stuff. So it's just movement. It's nice. It's interesting. And kind of a surprising thing to find in this Catholic university, in this kind of place that's mostly residential. And some interesting things. But tell me, however, if you think that those photographs I've mentioned are highlights, or if they are if there are other ones that you think maybe are also maybe more interesting.
Well, I mean, I think they're highlights of many highlights. But yeah, a lot of them were very interesting. I suppose I would have liked, well, you said it was elegant. I would have liked maybe a little bit more information on some of them.
Really?
Yeah, but I can see what you mean. That sometimes it's because there was one particular one that was of a couple that were there with their son who had cerebral palsy, and
Yeah, as in Bolivia.
yes, in
Yeah.
Bolivia, and it was interesting to read like just a couple of lines that explain that, because you could barely see his face, but it actually explained that a lot of people that lived in this community actually had some issues, some health issues caused by the fact that the births were done kind of like by people that didn't really have the qualifications, maybe, or just they simply didn't have the means to do them in a safer way.
Bolivia is an interesting place as well because there are some mud brick houses there that we noticed. So you also have a background in mud brick houses. So what can you tell?
Do I know?
You do from your Egypt stuff. So
Yeah.
mud is an amazing thing. You don't appreciate very much. So as the resident mud expert, could you fill us in a little bit about that?
Mud expert.
Don't get muddled up now.
No, well, I think, yeah, of course, the mud is very popular in many continents, and it's just a cheap way of building. Obviously, when there are the means to use it properly, then it can work really well, temperature-wise, insulation-wise, but yeah, otherwise it's just the cheapest thing to build with. And some of the houses that we saw, were pretty small spaces that didn't look really very well ventilated and so on. So probably wasn't the best situation. And we're talking as well about very humble people, very poor people in many cases.
Well, I do have a contact who was in Bolivia recently, and she was just saying that the it's not an easy place to be. Basically, the infrastructure isn't very good, the resources aren't very well developed, according to her. So I imagine that for a lot of people, that if it's cold outside, you can't heat the house, and vice versa. And there maybe is a lot of poverty there compared perhaps to other Latin American countries. I don't know, but generally this is the impression you would get from this exhibition, is that because they focused on these houses that were mud dwellings and poverty there. And also you mentioned the cerebral palsy, and they mentioned in the texts that usually in this particular village, the person who's attending the births isn't I know you said already, but I wanted to emphasize that because it kind of highlights the thing, that it's not just a house, but it's also just kind of the community around it as well. That's kind of affected by the same issues. So I'm just highlighting what you said, underlining and not repeating it.
Highlighting.
For example, and so I think that's from the exhibition. What you get a sense of in Bolivia is just the poverty of these particular areas, which obviously there's a lot more richness to Bolivia that we're not seeing in that exhibition. But and then of Pakistan, a lot of focus on just street scenes, really, people moving around, and some churches, some Quran schools, but nothing really stands out in terms of the Pakistan section in terms of maybe an overall theme. But I definitely think, however, that those photographs are very nice as well, while the African ones just show people kind of around food and drink, either in street markets, the aforementioned Arizona fish and chickens, fish and chicken, Jesus, and
makes you want to say fish and chips?
We didn't see the word. The CH was blocked, but because there's a picture of a chicken, you imagine chicken. And then even in the other kind of African photographs, they weren't urban centers, but they're still centered on people sharing bottles of what seemed to be lemonade and colas and soft drinks and things like that. So those, I guess, would be the themes connecting the African pictures in the exhibition.
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it's called the life of others, so it's just random moments, really, of like, people's lives. So in the case of Pakistan that you mentioned, most of them, yeah, they were just, running from one place to another, like on a motorbike, but that is quite a common sight, 3 people on a motorbike, things like that. So yeah, just the moments that are probably ordinary, but that's the interesting part of them, I think.
Yeah. Very good. So I agree. That sounded patronizing. I don't know. So we're going to do something that we haven't done for a long time, but this is the end of part 1, and we'll have a musical interlude, and we come back for the final parts. Well, maybe not part 2. We'll do part 2, and then we'll do our sign out, like always.
This was a long part 1,
and we'll talk about documentaries and all that stuff. And we're back, part 2. So you went on a bit of a documentary binge and watched 3 amazing ones. I've only seen one of the ones you've mentioned, so I think you'll have to do a lot of heavy lifting in this part. But the first one is Dying to Tell, about Spanish journalists who are foreign correspondents, war correspondents, and have been in places as diverse as Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, and other notable conflicts in the last 20 years, basically. And if you're Spanish, you know these people quite well because they are on the screens telling the news and being foreign correspondents. So it had a huge impact in that sense as well, hearing their story. Now, I have a lot to say about this as well, but I know this was something that really grabbed your attention as well, because ultimately this is about getting under the skin of why somebody does this type of job, because you need to be a specific type of personality perhaps to do it, and that entails as well a lot of sacrifices, danger, and it defines your life as well, because it's not a normal 9 to 5, of course. So a lot of elements there that we can jump into.
Well, first of all, I don't think if you're Spanish you necessarily know these people, and I think that's actually part of the whole thing, that a lot of these journalists that are war journalists, if you're specifically interested in conflicts and you follow their work for whatever reason, then you do know them. But otherwise, their photos, for example, are used in articles in different papers. Normally, a lot of the time, they're freelancers and they work for different media, but you might see the pictures, but you barely ever hear the names, or many times you don't, unless something happens, like they get killed or they get kidnapped. So I mean, I'm talking about the general public, and many of them don't even know about them. But I think that's part of why it is interesting, because there's sort of like these people in the shadows, and you always wonder kind of what kind of life they live, and what sort of personality you need to have to be able to do such a job. Obviously, you think, well, these people would be very brave, but it's interesting to hear it from the horse's mouth. This is all like interviews with them where they recount their experiences, and I think one of the most interesting things is that it is done by a war journalist. It was actually put together by a war journalist who is now kind of like trying to stop working as such, because it's just it's taken too much of a toll on him personally and emotionally. So probably the documentary was a way of him trying to deal with that and making sense of that by talking to people that have the same experiences as him.
Well, that's interesting because I think that's something that's marked all of them. They've all said it's like you never really let go of it. It's PTSD, and I kind of had the sense maybe that he was making this, yeah, a little bit what you said, but also maybe it's a way to get another hit of that drug, of being a foreign war correspondent. So obviously they're not blind to the dangers or flippant about it, but ultimately, whatever fear they might feel, in a lot of cases, it seemed the adrenaline of it superseded any other feeling about it. So you can't let go in two ways. One, you see horrific things and that stays with you, and that can be very difficult to deal with based on what they said. But also, I think it can't leave you because you just get it's a vocation, it's a lifestyle, and once you stop doing it, it's like a footballer hanging up their boots. What do I do now? Kind of thing. And that's like the inherent tension, I think, in most of their lives, apart from the specific instances of, well, I saw this terrible thing happen. So they obviously call those specific things to mind, but generally it's about, how do they connect, not wanting to see horrific things, being with their families maybe, and also this itch, that they want to scratch of being in these places, and a war breaks out and they grab their camera, and go there.
Yeah, I think, well, we talked about this before, to each other, about whether what motivates them. A lot of people talk about the adrenaline, and it's kind of like a sense of adventure, but obviously there's a huge kind of like humanitarian component and human component, because they're interested in reporting those stories, and they think it's necessary to report them, and they sort of feel like they're the only tool that many people have to be able to tell the story, and also to tell what's happening, because obviously we're having a prime example now. There's so much disinformation, and it's really hard to know what is happening on the ground, exactly, and let alone like from individual stories of people,
Well, there's one YouTuber who I follow who's Russian, which I think has replaced, this is not a football podcast, as the thing I say in most episodes now, but he's left Russia because for people who don't agree with the war, it's very dangerous. And also I read a story in The Guardian the other day as well about Ukrainian, or not, there are foreign correspondents actually in a Ukrainian hospital hiding out, and they were given surgical clothes to look like doctors, and the Russians came in and ignored them because they didn't look like journalists, and then the Ukrainians came in and saved them. So we don't need to look too far back into history. We just look at what's unfolding now, and we can see that being a journalist in this type of situation, where you should not be a target, you shouldn't be a target, but you often are, and it's a just inherently dangerous type of job. No, because we saw one person who eventually did lose his life, unfortunately, I think in Somalia, who had a bit of a crazy story. One guy found him motorcycling around Yugoslavia to see the war in the early 90s. Then they had a chat, sparked interest in this guy motorcycling around Yugoslavia to become a wars correspondent with credentials for a motorcycle magazine, and then became a very passionate and motivated cameraman. And there's a scene in Africa where he has his camera stolen and he's getting stitches in his head as well. But he's a very interesting character as well, because we see a little bit of his motivation, which we can maybe put across the other people as well, where he felt that in the particular case of Africa, they didn't have a voice, and he wanted to help cover these things that maybe people weren't talking about or people were ignoring. So you have those very intense and fascinating stories. But ultimately, though, when he does unfortunately get killed, another person in the documentary says, who was friends with him, that it's the story's never worth that. So they place a huge value in the story, but up to a certain point, of obviously, because it everybody should come home who goes out being a foreign correspondent as well. So it's interesting to see how they deal with these losses as well. That's a huge part of the documentary, I think.
Yes, his name was Miguel Gil, and he, well, there's a few journalists that were unfortunately killed. One of the most famous one was Jose Couso, no, in Hotel Palestine. That was very famous because basically, the U.S. Army killed him by what they was supposed to be by mistake, but of course, they just saw them firing straight at them. So that was hugely controversial. And I remember here it was here in Spain was. Yeah, it was terrible because I say cameraman. Here we're not even talking about somebody who's doing the reports, like the cameramen. They're even more invisible. So obviously, people that work with them and in that world, they know each other well. But he used to work with another journalist who was John Sisteaga, that was quite famous and quite recognizable, and you were used to seeing him report, but you never saw the person behind the camera. So it's even more tragic, no? That, the invisibility. But obviously, so many images from the Iraqi war came from him. So it's it's invaluable work, that these journalists do.
The Iraq part of it as well. What I like about the documentary is not chronological, so
Mm.
it jumps between time zones and conflicts. Um, and in the Iraq one, they show as well at night how they try to, celebrate birthdays, have parties,
Mm.
and basically forget the stresses of the day as well. So,
Yeah.
just the coping mechanisms as well that they delve into in the documentary has a lot of interest. This is on Netflix, I think, in most Netflix places with subtitles. So even if you're not
Mm.
Spanish or don't know these people, it's definitely worth a watch because I think it's such a specific calling and job. Um, Now, as I said, you obviously really liked it. I did too. What other parts of this documentary were you drawn to?
I think the interesting thing, apart from highlighting the work of these journalists, and I suppose like the companionship, how they all work with each other, even from different media. There's a situation where after this cameraman has been killed, somebody from a different channel is on standby, waiting in case the main journalist that worked with him cannot pull himself together. He's just standing there to do the to do that piece on his behalf. So they all support each other, and I think that's quite striking when they're talking. Whatever media they're from, they are kind of like all like a big group. Um, yeah, and then there was an unbelievable story from my point of view of this female journalist who was married to she was married to Jose Couso, and then she was also the partner of another journalist that got kidnapped many years later. So it's just unbelievable like, how strong these people are, that they kind of managed to go through like extremely stressful situations, and obviously takes a toll on their families as well. And they do talk a little bit about that as well, and you can tell how many of them feel so guilty that they're putting their families through that. But it's kind of like beyond them, it's something that they really feel like they have to do or they cannot stop doing. So that's also an interesting take.
I've also heard that because I know a journalist who was a journalist in Venezuela, and he has some interesting things to say as well about press freedom in that country, but that's a separate story. But in his university, where they're studying journalism here, I think he did a master's. One of the lecturers actually quit her job, left her family. Well, she's going to come back to them, but she went straight over to Poland and Ukraine to try and get in there and cover the story. So again, this is a very current and ongoing example of foreign correspondence being drawn maybe despite themselves or without any power to stop it to cover these stories. So yeah, all in all, very good documentary, and a lot to think about. Now we have a couple of others that you have seen, I haven't. So I don't know if you want to kind of touch on those.
Well, I do believe you've seen the Ukraine one, and you told me about it a couple of years ago, but you don't remember for some reason. I'm pretty sure you told me about it. It's on Netflix as well. And well, it's very relevant now. Definitely very relevant. It talks about the Maidan revolution and everything that happened in 2014, and yeah, from a technical point of view, like shot in a very like epic way, and obviously it's showing the side of the demonstrators, and kind of like in a very uplifting and basically trying to focus on the will of the people and so on, and how it developed. So yeah, it's definitely worth a watch, especially now, if you want to kind of like understand the last few years.
I think that's interesting how it's shot, because the journalist one is about it's a lot of talking heads and things like that, which is fine. Cut with footage actually from the theaters of conflict, but from how you describe it, it is a lot more dynamic. This situation, or this documentary, and that documentary is called Ukraine on Fire, again on Netflix, which also, well, the next documentary we can talk about as well is also on Netflix, isn't it?
It's online Netflix junkies.
Like guerrilla marketing here. And this is called E-Team, and specifically about Human Rights Watch, who are one of the biggest human rights organizations in the world, comparable to Amnesty International. It's like the Real Madrid, Barcelona of human rights advocacy. So I have my Amnesty International background, so I'm very interested for you to sell this Human Rights Watch to me.
Well, actually, for quite a bit of the documentary, and I don't know if it's done on purpose or not, but there's a huge part at the beginning where it talks about the E-Team, but you actually don't know if they're just like flying solo or what, which is kind of bizarre, because it's a couple, and you just see them like coming backwards and forwards, and obviously they're activists, but you don't see them being linked to any organization at first, which is a bit confusing, because you're thinking, well, should people be doing this out of their own accord? Like, probably not.
Yeah.
But then they slowly introduce all the people, and they are working for Human Rights Watch, and eventually you sort of like realize that they all working for them as well. So they're interesting profiles, and they sort of like showcase what they do when they are in the field, but also when they go back to their countries, how they use that information to try and denounce abuses, and even like take things to court, and they talk about a particularly successful case, which was with Milosevic, with the Serbian genocide, and they he one of the people, one of the activists, played like a major role in during the trial, documenting all the abuses that he'd heard of, of the people he'd interviewed, and all the things he recorded when he was in the field, and he had to face sort of Milosevic, in person, and he was talking about that experience as well. I think it was very interesting. Obviously, the work they do is crazy. It's extremely useful. There was a little bit missing for me on, more of the evidence, because sometimes it sort of seemed a little bit not that solid. Like, sometimes I was surprised at how they collected things. Like, for example, like the woman, like, she was in Syria and she was just writing things on a notepad. She didn't speak the language. She spoke many languages, to be fair. She was Russian in origin, but she didn't speak Arabic, and then she had a translator, and then she was writing things down on a notepad and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it was quite. I was surprised, they weren't using like a dictaphone or things like that. And then they didn't show you very much of like, how they kind of like put the kids together. That bit was a bit basic, but I think it was just obviously it wasn't explained in the documentary. I'm sure, in real life the work is much deeper.
A lot of things there. So the Milosevic thing is very interesting because even now in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there's contested legacies with one side who still see people like him as heroes and other people who don't, which obviously you shouldn't see him as a hero. So it's still something that's rumbling on in today's political landscape in that country. And also it's quite interesting. The E team, is this like some kind of emergency team or what they call, yeah, to dispatch them to unfolding crises and
That's it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know from Amnesty International, there's been a lot. Sometimes they do get in trouble for maybe jumping the gun with evidence and publishing something that's later retracted, maybe, or with having adverts that are very in your face and people think that's a bit too graphic. Or even, there's been a lot of stuff about the work culture there that people feel depressed there. There's lots of bullying and it's not the nicest place to work. I think they're referring to Amnesty UK, but also like Amnesty in the Western world and also Amnesty America have a huge rivalry as well. So if you look, even superficially at the Amnesty International story, and again, Amnesty International are a fantastic organization. I don't want to discredit them or anything, but there are things you can see there are fissures in the organization. I don't know if in this documentary they go into that regarding Human Rights Watch.
They don't really go into the organization much, other than they show the frustration, for example, of this woman when she is trying to put the evidence because she wants to have a no-fly zone, which again is something that Ukraine
Current, yeah.
Ukraine is claiming for these days. But she's putting forward an argument how it's essential to have a no-fly zone because they're targeting civilians, they're killing people, they are basically massacring people. And then the bosses basically decide against it, decide that it's not a good idea. And she's just very frustrated because she's been there, she's collected the evidence, and for her that's the most important thing, and she sees it as like the main solution to stop the conflict. Obviously, the bosses see it from a more practical point of view and what things you can actually, what consequences that is going to have, and a bit like the discussion that is going on currently about Ukraine as well.
So, if we leave the documentary about the foreign correspondents thinking they're a special breed doing a very dangerous but important work, that's maybe one of the conclusions we can draw. From the Ukraine on Fire, we see a little bit more about the political turbulence that's been there over the last few years. If we watch this, which is called E-Team, also on Netflix, what is the thing that you took away maybe after finishing it?
Well, that just the work of like individual people can have a huge impact, because even if they're part of an organization, at the end of the day, it is them risking their lives and them going to these areas and managing to go into these areas basically, as and when they're called. They just shoot to different countries. It is that availability that makes it possible to have this information. So.
Well, this is, I think, the power of human rights organizations, because Amnesty was founded by Peter Benenson, who saw a report about two Portuguese students who toasted freedom, and they were arrested for it. And he thought in his London kitchen, what can I do about it? And one man founded this organization, which for a lot of the early years was staffed by housewives writing letters on behalf of faraway prisoners. And that was extraordinarily effective. So, I mean, these organizations are a testament to small actions from a small group of people can have a big echo as well. So, fascinating stuff. So, I think it's time we rest our brains and we go to part 3. And we're back again for part 3, the final part of today's episode. And speaking of exhibitions, we're I was going to say foraying into unknown territory, but the first few things we actually ever did together were launching exhibitions and the like. And now we're going back to our roots doing that, because you have a lot of very interesting photographs about Egypt. Now, I love how you describe these. You know, I was going to say, because like as a tangent, I saw a Howard Stern interview yesterday where he's basically that guy Adam Driver. He was basically saying, and then you went to Juilliard, and then you failed, and then you went to an actor, and you know, he was basically giving all the information in the interview. And Adam Driver was just going, yep, that's right. And it was just the most hilarious interview ever, because the interviewer was just talking too much, like I'm kind of doing now, even though I'm not interviewing, I'm co-hosting with you, of course. But why should I describe? Yeah, you should look at me like that, because what am I talking about? But why should I describe this exhibition when you have the thing about it, which is like how kind of random it was, but you can describe it kind of better? All these kind of chance encounters of people just walking into frame.
Yes, it was completely accidental. They're all pictures of people in rural Egypt, but I wasn't really taking a picture of their picture. I was actually taking pictures of houses, of mud brick houses, and they were, a lot of the time, they were really like in the way, so it could even get annoying. But other times I was just, obviously the whole thing about the houses was is the social aspect, so I was also interested in seeing how they behave around the house. And a lot of these people, extremely poor people, really proud of their houses, really proud of what they had, and even if it was very little, and as usual with humble people, just trying to share it all with you and to show you what tricks they come up with to improve their houses. And so they just happened to be there. And then obviously I've had to go through these pictures many times for my research, and then it just struck me how many pictures of people's faces or even people just standing around, but they were quite expressive to me. So well, you suggested maybe we could do an exhibition with them. They're not really great pictures or anything like that. They're just ordinary pictures. But, well, you
really know how to sell it.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say the great pictures because there are plenty of, really good photographers. But I think there's value in the fact that these people never get a chance to be shown anywhere. Because even when you go to see, National Geographic, or even when we went to see the Steve Curry exhibition, so they're all people that, sometimes or many times they're showcasing what rural life or what poor life is like in many different countries. But but they're always like super edited, or they're always kind of like staged in a way, or they have a lot of time to look for the opportunity. But the fact that these are accidental, I think in a way it's got its charm.
A lot of the recent ones in Casa Arabi, for example, have just been been nicely taken, but don't really, I don't know, they didn't pop, so I think there's a place for your unfiltered, raw, pure, unadulterated images of Egypt. And to find out all the news about that stuff and all the other stuff, we can say that you can find us on Instagram and all that stuff.
Yes, so Instagram is _elarpa, _elarpa_.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, Facebook as well, elarpa.
And not TikTok, definitely not TikTok.
Not TikTok, no. And that well talk joke went over everybody. So
okay, very good. So your volume is going down now. So you're petering out. So I think it's a great time to end the podcast and say thank you and good luck.
Bye.